Canada's Conservative Podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Schmale, Member of Parliament for Haliburton, Kawartha Lakes, Brock, with new content for you every single Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We do appreciate you joining us here today. We've got great content, an amazing show lined up for you. We ask that you like, comment, subscribe, share this program. Together, we can ensure that this is Justin Trudeau's last term as Prime Minister in the great country of Canada. As you might not always get the opportunity to listen or watch the entire program right this second, download it later on, listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, you name it, it is out there. All right, let's get to our guests. We have James Bezan. He's a friend of the show, been on before, the Member of Parliament for Selkirk-Interlake-Eastman, also the Shadow Minister for Ethics. And beside him, we have Alex Ruff, the Member of Parliament for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound in the beautiful province of Ontario. Two Ontarians here. So, James, let's start with you. You spoke at the emergency debate yesterday in the House of Commons regarding the situation in Ukraine, and as we like to remind, this is a live show, so if you are listening to it later on, past March 1st, the information might be changing after the broadcast. So could you spoke at the rally in Toronto as well, could you give us a brief overview of basically what's going on the ground, what are you seeing and what are you hearing?
So as someone of Ukrainian heritage and someone that has been very involved in Ukraine, been there many times for election observation missions, been over there as part of the Harper government. After the invasion of Crimea and the legal annexation and occupation that is still happening today in Crimea, and the war that Putin and his proxies were waging in the west or the east of Ukraine, in Donbass. I was part of the group of the Conservative government that went over and actually delivered military assistance to Ukraine. It was under Harper that we started Operation Unifier to train Ukrainian soldiers, trained over 34,000. The Liberals have continued on Operation Unifier, and they did an amazing job in training these soldiers, because we're seeing the results of that now. Is that one of the reasons Ukraine has been able to repel the initial phases of this Russian invasion from the north and from the south and from the east, is because of the training that Canada and our allies had done. The UK, the Americans, the Poles, and other NATO allies had been in Ukraine for the last 8 years, training up 100,000 plus military members in Ukraine. Vladimir Putin is the only person here that's responsible for the war that's happening in Ukraine. Let's never forget this. And he is, trying to revise history. He is spewing toxic rhetoric, and the whole idea that he wants to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine is all part of his propaganda machine. You got to remember that the heroic actions that we're seeing in Ukraine and the leadership that we're seeing by President Zelensky. You got to remember, Zelensky's of Jewish heritage, and he's out there. The whole idea that somebody like President Zelensky was a Nazi is ridiculous. And Ukraine lived through the Holocaust. Some of the biggest war graves are from the Holocaust are in Ukraine. 28,000 at Babyn Yar, just north of Kiev. I've been there with Prime Minister Harper. So Ukraine is fighting valiantly, and Putin thought when they marched across the border that the Ukrainians would be there, thanks for liberating us. And that's not the case. And you look at the war that's being waged in Kharkiv, the second largest city in Ukraine. It's in the east. I've been there. I've been up to the border crossing at Belgorod, where all the Russian troops and tanks have been rolling across towards Kharkiv. Russian speaking, but very much patriotic Ukrainians. I've seen it personally in marches and rallies that I participated in Kharkiv when I was last there, and they are fighting hard. Every citizen that can fight is fighting. They've picked up firearms and sidearms, and they are out there defending the motherland. And so it's amazing and inspiring to watch them rally, but it's heartbreaking to see the devastation. And news last night that, again, Putin is now definitely a war criminal. He's violating the Geneva Convention. They're using carpet bombs. They used a thermobaric warhead last night. A number of media reporting on it. This is a major escalation in the type of weapons that he's prepared to use, win at all costs, and he doesn't care about the civilian losses and collateral damage. That's why Canada and our allies have to do more. This is a major turning point in modern history, and we'll be judged for what we do. It's time to be Chamberlain, we don't want to be Chamberlain, we want to be Churchill. And we need that type of leadership right now. So I'm very glad to see countries that have been sitting on the fence and get involved. Since 2018, we have been calling as conservatives for the provision of lethal defensive weapons to Ukraine, including anti-tank missiles. It's my understanding that 100 Carl Gustavs that were sitting in storage, that the government are actually delivering those today. So I do thank the government of Canada for finally listening and doing it, because Ukraine needs them now. I'm impressed that non-NATO partners like Sweden have stepped up, who've always been very impartial to NATO versus the Russian Federation, the Moscow sphere of influence. But they sent in 5,000 anti-tank weapons, as well as defensive aid, like hard helmets and flat jackets and Kevlar wear, so that they can protect themselves when they're out in the battlefield. So, and it's about not just supplying the armed forces of Ukraine with weapons and ammunition, it's about supplying the citizen soldiers that have stepped up and formed militia groups now and are the ones that are doing the street fighting.
I want to get into the sanctions and what the world's doing in just a second, but first I want to bring in Alex to talk about the military side. Alex is a veteran, a colonel in the Canadian Armed Forces, served over many decades as a colonel and served in Afghanistan, your most recent deployment. What are you seeing militarily? I think at the beginning we saw some breakdowns in how the Russians were operating, how they're invading. We saw tanks running out of gas on the side. It's my understanding that's been fixed on the Russian side, but what are you seeing? What's your analysis?
Well, I'll correct you a little bit. My latest appointment was Iraq. I was
I'm
in Iraq
sorry.
just before I jumped into federal politics. And I was at the Canadian Joint Operations Command when we were first standing up Op Unifier and putting together such a terrific mission to really create the foundation for what's going on in Ukraine right now, on top of other NATO allies and other partners that have been helping the Ukrainians, so that they are prepared as much as they can be against this horrendous act by President Putin and Russia. So on the military side of the thing, I think there's been a lot of, dare I say, miscalculations on the strategic side by everybody. I think Putin thought he could waltz right in and, as James was just hinting at, basically walk in and be given a hero's welcome and install his puppet sort of government that would be sympathetic to the Russian regime. And that didn't happen. It didn't happen really as soon as he crossed the border. On the flip side, I actually think, and unfortunately I don't have access to all that same intelligence and reporting, but the fact that the West didn't call the bluff of President Putin and that we left, I think that basically signaled in some ways to Putin that, hey, we're not going to interfere in this. And he thought he could get this cakewalk to come straight into Kiev and install that. Obviously, I think it was all based on the assumption by the West that, look, he's serious about coming. All the indications were that he was coming. I thought, I would absolutely put money. He had provided all the indications he was going to go into these eastern provinces or whatever they're called, to take that area. But I think if we would have still had Western boots on the ground, it would have changed the calculus of potentially him dropping these bombs and doing these atrocious acts that are in contravention of the Geneva Convention against the civilians, had we been there and showing that solidarity. Now, at the same time, the calculus, and we're seeing this, I think, in some of Putin's own actions, his own soldiers, from a military perspective, aren't performing to the same standard that he is, because I think they're a lot smarter nowadays. And I think all militaries around the globe, that the soldiers have access to a lot more, and they realize that, whoa, what are we doing going in and taking an independent country that realistically never posed a strategic or a tactical or a military threat to Russia ever. This is all about politics and influence, energy, and more, and I think really Putin's own political survival. So look, kudos to the Russian people that are protesting in the streets against Putin, but really the kudos go to the Ukrainian people more than anything. On the logistics side, 100%. It's hard to judge. Some of the snippets that we see in the news are just one snapshot at any one time of a military action. So obviously the logistics does drive military conflict and military operations. So some of those things that we've saw, are, aren't shocking, but at the same time, let's not underestimate, Russia can easily win this conflict from a strictly military standpoint, but it's how much are they willing to pay, and kudos, as James clearly highlighted, to the president and all those Ukrainian people, and their ability to stand up and fight back and not just roll over. And they're going to make this, they're standing up for freedom, and it is galvanized the West and allies and non-traditional allies to step forward, reinforce the NATO borders, and make sure Putin understands what, hey, this is not acceptable, and the sanctions and everything. And I really think the next 48 hours are going to be vital to see just how far Putin's willing to take the atrocities and what political price he's willing to pay to get his military victory, because I don't think he's going to get the long-term strategic victory. So it's the people, though, that are the real ones that are paying the price are the Ukrainian people themselves, and all of the free world owes everything we possibly can to support Ukraine.
Let's talk about the political.
Just to follow up on that, because I think the one interesting thing is got to remember that, as Alex was saying, the Russian soldiers, have access to social media. They see in Russia right now, over several thousand Russians have been arrested for protesting against the war, for being out there, fighting for peace. And so they see that, and you got to remember they're fighting for a tyrannical despot with Vladimir Putin, where the people of Ukraine, and you got to remember Ukraine has already survived one genocide, the Holodomor, and so on top of trying to protect their Ukrainian nationalism, trying to protect the Ukrainian culture, they're protecting the homeland. They're inspired by the leadership of President Zelensky and the politicians that are still sitting in their parliament right now in the Verkhovna Rada. And you see that they're not only trying to protect their families and their communities, they're trying to protect Ukraine itself, and that it speaks volumes to how hard they're willing to fight, and why Putin's only acceptance in so-called diplomacy is he wants to surrender, and he wants to remove the entire government so he can install his puppet regime. And Ukrainians will never accept that.
All right, let's talk about quickly the political price, and I want to go into kind of energy independence. We only have a few minutes left. What political price is Putin willing to see right now? He's almost isolated throughout the world. You can't trade Russian stocks. You can't, they're basically nothing that Russia can do at this point to grow their economy. Their currency is tanking. What is the political price? What is the price here?
So it's going to be huge, and the whole goal right now is to break Russia's financial back, and there's no question that the hard sanctions that have come forward, as well as using SWIFT to ban them from using it for financial transactions and speaking to other financial institutions around the world, is crushing Putin directly, his oligarchs, his government, especially when the central bank has been sanctioned and banned from SWIFT, and ultimately it will hurt their economy. And the decisions by Europe to stop Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline to Germany is another blow to their economy. You got to remember, 40% of Russia's economy is based around oil and gas. And if they can't sell it to the world, they're going to go bankrupt pretty quick. And we got to remember, the Soviet Union failed, not because of, well, there's a lot of great diplomacy that took place, but they went bankrupt. Yeah, and if we bankrupt Putin's war machine, this war is done. The more that we also can do in isolating him on the global fora, whether it's the UN, the OSCE, or the G20, it does hurt him, because he's a very proud, narcissistic individual, and so he wants to be, at all these events where he can glad hand and backslap. And I'll never forget, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, when they invaded Crimea, he led the charge to kick Russia out of the G8, make it back to the G7, and it was Harper at the G20 who told Putin to his face, he says, "Get out of Ukraine." And if the world had followed some of those strong recommendations that were coming from Stephen Harper at the time, including NATO membership for Ukraine, we wouldn't be having this discussion today. Because for whatever reason, Putin has been provoked, and he definitely is in trouble politically at home. Too many Russians are seeing what freedom really looks like, and what true democracy can do for a country and for individual rights and freedoms. And so that's why he figures Ukraine is too close to home, and he can't sit back and allow them to continue to aspire to be members of the European Union, members of NATO, and really have a truly open, transparent, and free country.
Let's talk quickly about energy independence. Between 2001 and 2021, Canada imported about $13.1 billion of Russian oil. We canceled the Energy East Pipeline. The Government of Canada, the Liberals, canceled because of increased regulations, moving goalposts the Energy East Pipeline, which would have allowed Alberta Energy to get to New Brunswick and then to the European market. Even if we said, okay, let's cut off the Nord Stream 2, let's stop the funding of the Russian oil machine. We couldn't get our product as Canadians to the European market even if we wanted to at this point. Keystone XL has been canceled because of Joe Biden, the president, who canceled that. Now it's back on the table again. It was Joe Biden who put who released the sanctions to finish off construction Nord Stream 2, and now he's put the sanctions back on. So this is the whole conversation, why we've been pushing it for so many years, why energy independence is so important and why we should be promoting Canadian energy.
Look, I can't disagree with that, and both of you have more experience on this from the political standpoint, but it's that lack of foresight and lack of understanding and coming up with a plan. You know, this government's very good at making short-term decisions without thinking the long-term consequences out and how it's going to benefit not only Canada but the world. We have the most environmental sustainable oil and gas in the world. We can be doing our part to not only reduce emissions, but it will actually reduce emissions by us producing more and transporting more. We have human rights codes for how we produce and manufacture and refine our products, and I think that would do wonders. But more importantly, it would take away that economic support that so many of these regimes around the globe, and in particular Russia, as James laid out, is dependent upon. Without that, they go bankrupt. Yeah. They have to figure out how they can play ball.
Exactly. We're just over time, but I always give the guest the last word. So, James, the floor is yours.
I think in the debate that we saw last night, and the tone in the House and the tone of everyone that's been speaking out publicly in support of Ukraine, it just shows that we stand with Ukraine, that us as parliamentarians across party lines are united in standing with Ukraine. I think all of us realize that this is a turning point, and it's just not a battle for Ukraine. This is a battle for our democratic values. This is a battle for human rights. This is a battle for freedom. And unfortunately, Ukraine is paying the price. They're the tip of the spear. They're on the front lines, and they're in our thoughts and prayers through all this. And all of us will continue to be united and stand with Ukraine.
Yeah, final word there, Jamie, is just, everybody please keep your thoughts and prayers for Ukraine. It's volatile right now, and we do not want Putin to take the next step in escalation, nor any country. And at the same time, as a bit of a plug for our Canadian Armed Forces, and for your listeners and watchers out there, for those Canadians that are interested in joining the Canadian Armed Forces, they need you. The world's a volatile place, and I wish I could give you optimistic news that it's going to get better. The world is going to be volatile for a while, and we need good Canadians, men, women, to join and support our military, because right now there's countries like Ukraine, countries like Afghanistan, countries all over the world that need Canadian help.
Well, there's so many questions I wanted to ask you too. I wanted to segue into procurement. We still have plane situations, our Navy.
The F-35.
We have so many. Maybe we'll get you guys back on, because I wanted to ask you all about that. James, former defense critic, Alex being in the Canadian Armed Forces. I would love to hear your perspective, but we are way over time. So we do appreciate it. James Bezan, Member of Parliament for Selkirk-Interlake-Eastman in the beautiful province of Manitoba, the ethics critic. Also Alex Ruff, the MP for Bruce-Grey-Owen Sound, and also a proud veteran of our Canadian Armed Forces. We thank him and many others for their service. If you liked what you saw, what you heard, please like, comment, subscribe, share this program. We have new content for you every single Tuesday. We do appreciate that. If you can't, of course, watch or listen to it right now, download it, listen to it on platforms like CastBox, iTunes, Google Play, Spotify. We will be back next week. We hope you join us. Remember, low taxes, less government, more freedom. That's the blueprint.